The airport was bustling with travelers, their footsteps echoing across the polished floors. Families clutched their luggage, business professionals checked their phones, and airline staff called out flight updates. It was a scene of organized chaos, one that Colonel David Carter had seen many times before. However, today was different. The weight on his chest wasn't just from the medals displayed on his crisp uniform. It was from the solemn duty he had been entrusted with. He wasn't here for a routine flight. He was here to bring a fallen soldier home. Private First Class Jason Reynolds was only 21 years old, gone far too soon. His body lay in a casket on the tarmac, draped in the American flag, a stark reminder of the cost of service. Colonel Carter had escorted many fallen soldiers before, but each time it struck the same deep chord within him. His mission was clear: no soldier gets left behind. With measured steps, he approached the airline counter, military orders in hand, his uniform pressed and immaculate. He placed his documents in front of the airline agent, expecting the usual procedure: a quick verification, a respectful nod, and clearance to board. Instead, he was met with hesitation. The young woman behind the counter frowned slightly, rechecking his paperwork. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard. "Sir, can I see that again?" she asked, her tone uneasy. Colonel Carter handed the documents back, watching as she whispered to a colleague nearby. He recognized the look, the shift in posture, the nervous glance exchanged between employees. He had seen it before, though never in this setting. Something wasn't right. Moments later she returned, her smile forced and professional. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's an issue with your ticket. We can't allow you to board at this time." Carter remained composed, his years of military training keeping his frustration at bay. "There must be a mistake. I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier." He tapped his orders for emphasis. "Everything is in order." The agent's gaze darted away as she repeated, "I understand, sir, but there's a security protocol in place. We can't override it." "Security protocol?" Carter's tone remained even, but inside he felt the first flicker of something he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge: anger. He had flown under similar circumstances before, and never had there been a policy preventing him from boarding. Behind him, the murmurs started. Travelers in line shifted, sensing the tension. Some leaned in to listen. Others exchanged confused glances. The denial of a soldier's flight was not something one saw every day. Carter squared his shoulders. He wasn't leaving without an answer. He wasn't leaving without fulfilling his duty. But the airline staff wasn't backing down either. The air around the counter grew heavy, thick with something unspoken. The moment stretched. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was about something deeper, something Carter had spent a lifetime recognizing. And soon the entire country would take notice. Colonel David Carter stood at the airline counter, his military orders and identification placed neatly before the agent. His posture was unwavering, the disciplined stance of a decorated officer who had faced far greater challenges than a routine airport procedure. Yet the unease in the agent's eyes and the hesitation in her voice told him everything. This was not routine. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's an issue with your ticket. We can't allow you to board at this time," the agent repeated, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Carter inhaled deeply, keeping his composure. He had learned long ago that frustration did little in situations like this. Instead, he pressed for clarity. "Ma'am, I am on official military duty, escorting the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds. My documents are in order. What exactly is the issue?" The agent shifted uncomfortably, flicking her gaze toward her colleagues, who whispered among themselves. Her voice dropped slightly, as if she were searching for the right words. "It's just protocol, sir. A security measure." Carter's jaw tightened. He had flown numerous times under the same circumstances. There was no security protocol that would bar him from escorting a fallen soldier home. His presence was not an exception, it was an expectation. Behind him, the line of passengers had grown restless. Whispers turned into quiet speculation. A man in a business suit frowned as he checked his watch. A woman with a toddler on her hip muttered to her husband, "Why would they stop him? He's military." Carter glanced toward the supervisor, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a name tag reading Eric Lawson. He had been standing nearby, observing the exchange with a calculated silence. When their eyes met, Lawson finally stepped forward. "Colonel Carter, I apologize for the inconvenience," he began, his tone clipped and rehearsed. "But we have policies in place, and unfortunately we're unable to make an exception at this time." There it was again. Policies. A vague explanation, void of reason or accountability. Carter exhaled, carefully choosing his next words. "I've escorted fallen soldiers before. I know the process, and I know that there is no policy preventing me from boarding. If there is an actual issue, state it clearly." The supervisor hesitated, his fingers drumming against the counter. The weight of the growing crowd behind Carter was pressing in, the murmurs growing louder. A man in a USMC veteran's cap took a step forward from the line. "Excuse me," the veteran said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of authority. "Are you saying this man doesn't have the clearance to fly?" Lawson stiffened. "No, sir. That's not the issue." "Then what is?" The veteran's voice sharpened. "Because I've been through security 1,000 times, and I've never seen protocol deny a soldier on duty." A hushed agreement rippled through the passengers. More phones were out now, recording, capturing every moment. Carter could feel the shift. The public was watching. Lawson adjusted his tie, avoiding eye contact. "I'll check with management," he muttered, stepping away. The young woman at the counter swallowed hard and tapped at her keyboard, pretending to be busy. The silence behind the counter was deafening. Carter stood his ground, knowing that whatever was happening wasn't about a system error. It was something else. The crowd sensed it too. The woman in a red blazer leaned toward her husband. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered. Carter didn't move, didn't blink. The moment hung thick with an unspoken truth. And that's when the first person in line spoke up. "This is wrong." The battle had begun. The tension in the terminal grew thicker with every passing second. Colonel David Carter stood unwavering at the counter, his presence a stark contrast to the uncertainty rippling through the airline staff. The murmurs of waiting passengers had turned into full-fledged whispers of disbelief. A decorated military officer was being denied his flight while escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. The young airline agent at the counter, visibly uncomfortable, continued to type meaningless keystrokes into her system. Her hands trembled slightly, her face pale as she avoided eye contact with both Carter and the growing crowd behind him. The supervisor, Eric Lawson, had disappeared into the back, claiming he needed to check with management. Carter, ever patient, ever composed, stood his ground. He had faced worse. Combat zones, diplomatic crises, life-or-death situations. But here, in a civilian airport, he found himself caught in a battle he never expected to fight. Then, the first voice spoke up. "This is wrong." The voice belonged to the older Marine in the USMC cap, a man who had been watching the scene unfold from several spots back in the line. His arms were crossed, his weathered face lined with frustration. "I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen a soldier treated like this." His words sent a ripple through the crowd. Others nodded, shifting their weight as if considering whether they should speak up as well. A young woman, no older than 25, hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, holding up her phone. "Excuse me, sir," she said, addressing Carter. "I just want to confirm. They're not letting you board." Carter glanced at her, his voice even. "That's correct." She swallowed, her fingers tightening around her phone. "I'm live right now," she announced. "People need to see this." And with that, the floodgates opened. A man in a hoodie near the front pulled out his phone. "No way this is happening. Someone explain to me how an officer escorting a fallen soldier is a security threat." A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket turned to her husband. "This isn't right," she muttered. "We need to say something." A businessman in a tailored suit frowned, his arms crossed. "This better not be what I think it is." The whispers turned to outrage. People began recording from every angle, capturing the faces of the airline employees, the hesitation in their voices, the look of quiet fury in Carter's eyes as he stood his ground. And then the dam broke. A tweet appeared, posted by a college student standing in the crowd. They just denied a black U.S. Army colonel his flight while escorting a fallen soldier's remains. This is how we treat our heroes? Let him fly. Retweets climbed in real time. The video attached to the post, showing Carter standing firm as the airline staff fumbled for excuses, gained thousands of views in minutes. Passengers at the terminal stopped what they were doing, scrolling through their phones, nodding in agreement, refreshing their feeds. Then, another voice, louder this time. "Excuse me," a woman in a red blazer raised her voice, turning to the counter. "Can someone explain why this man is being denied his flight?" The agent behind the counter swallowed hard but had no answer. The world was watching now, and Carter knew without a doubt that this battle was far from over. As the confrontation at the airline counter continued, social media had already taken over the story. The first tweet: "They just denied a black U.S. Army colonel his flight while escorting a fallen soldier's remains. This is how we treat our heroes? Let him fly," was spreading like wildfire. Within minutes, hundreds of people had shared the post, and the number kept climbing. The attached video, showing Colonel David Carter standing firm while airline staff fumbled for an explanation, had gone viral in real time. In the airport terminal, people weren't just recording anymore, they were actively engaging. A young journalist in a grey hoodie, standing further back in the crowd, typed furiously on his phone, drafting a breaking news post for his blog. A middle-aged woman, scrolling through Twitter, gasped and turned to her husband. "It's already on Facebook," she whispered, showing him her screen. "Look at the comments. People are furious." The Marine in the USMC cap, who had been one of the first to speak up, pulled out his own phone. "They don't even know what kind of storm they just started," he muttered under his breath. Across the terminal, passengers began checking their phones, their faces shifting from curiosity to outrage. More tweets and retweets piled up. Unbelievable. A decorated U.S. Army colonel denied a flight while fulfilling his duty. Who's responsible? Let him fly? Is this how we treat those who serve? We demand answers now at Airline Name. Do better. The hashtag #LetHimFly began trending. Then, a veteran advocacy group tweeted, "We are aware of the disgraceful incident happening at Airport Name. Our soldiers deserve better. Expect action." That post alone racked up 500 retweets in under an hour. Meanwhile, the airline staff at the counter could feel the shift. The young agent who had initially denied Carter's boarding looked visibly shaken. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if she wanted to disappear. The supervisor, Eric Lawson, returned from the back office, his face drained of color. He had a phone in his hand, scrolling through a flood of notifications. One glance at Carter, and he knew the situation had spiraled beyond control. By now, major news outlets were picking up the story. A breaking news ticker flashed across a local station. U.S. Army colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier, airline under fire. In a matter of minutes, the outrage had reached national headlines. Passengers whispered amongst themselves. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others openly recorded the unfolding chaos. A few people even walked up to the counter, demanding explanations on Carter's behalf. A college student live streaming on Instagram narrated what was happening. "This airline is scrambling now. People are demanding answers. This isn't going away." The moment had transformed from a private injustice into a national scandal. The airline staff knew it, the crowd knew it, and Colonel Carter, standing calm and composed, knew it too. The pressure was mounting, and the airline would have no choice but to respond. By the time the airline executives realized what was happening, the situation had already spiraled out of their control. The viral posts, the live streams, and the growing media coverage had turned a single act of discrimination into a full-blown crisis. Inside the airport terminal, the tension was suffocating. The crowd of onlookers had grown, phones held high, recording every move the airline staff made. "Let Him Fly" had climbed to the top trending topic on Twitter, and news outlets were already calling for statements. At the counter, the supervisor, Eric Lawson, returned, his face pale and his phone buzzing non-stop. He had spoken with his higher-ups, and the message was clear: fix this now. Lawson cleared his throat and forced a smile. "Colonel Carter," he started, trying to sound professional, "we deeply regret the misunderstanding. It appears there was a system error regarding your boarding clearance." Carter didn't flinch. His years of military service had trained him to recognize carefully crafted excuses when he heard them. His voice remained steady. "A system error," he repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" The crowd wasn't buying it either. A woman near the front scoffed. "Come on, we all saw what happened. This wasn't a system error." The Marine veteran in the USMC cap folded his arms. "What you mean is, you got caught," he muttered, loud enough for several people to hear. The airline agent at the counter, the same one who denied Carter's flight earlier, stared at her computer screen, avoiding eye contact. She knew what was happening, and so did everyone else. Just then, a man in a sharp navy mule suit approached from the back of the terminal. He had the calculated walk of a corporate damage control expert. His airline ID badge, clipped neatly to his pocket, read, "Regional Director, Paul Richards." Richards glanced at the phones recording him, before offering Carter a rehearsed look of concern. "Colonel Carter," he said, his tone carefully measured. "On behalf of the airline, I want to sincerely apologize for this situation. We value and respect our military personnel, and we assure you this was never our intention." Carter didn't move. He simply stared him down. Richards forced a corporate smile. "We'd like to personally escort you to your flight right now and offer a complimentary first-class upgrade as a gesture of our appreciation." More murmurs rippled through the crowd. Carter, still standing tall in his uniform, narrowed his eyes. "If this hadn't gone viral," he said slowly, "would we even be having this conversation?" Richards hesitated, just for a second, before pasting the same empty smile back onto his face. "Colonel, I assure you, we always strive to serve our passengers with the utmost respect." The Marine veteran let out a dry laugh. "Yeah? Funny how respect only seems to show up when the cameras are rolling." Richards' jaw tightened, but he kept his cool. "Let's get you on your flight, Colonel," he said, his calm, PR-friendly demeanor beginning to crack. Carter looked at him, then at the hundreds of phones still recording before finally adjusting his uniform. He nodded. "Then let's finish this mission." But as Carter turned toward the gate, the airline's nightmare was just beginning. Just as the airline scrambled to contain the growing public outrage, another development shifted the power dynamics entirely. A hush spread through the terminal as a tall, commanding figure entered the scene. Major Thomas Beckett, a representative from the Department of the Army, strode toward the counter, his military ID badge clipped neatly to his uniform. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere. This was no longer just a PR disaster for the airline. It had now become a military issue. Passengers instinctively stepped aside, the phones still recording, as Beckett locked eyes with the airline's regional director, Paul Richards. "Colonel Carter," Beckett greeted with a sharp nod. "We've been briefed on the situation." Carter returned the nod, standing tall. "Major." Beckett didn't waste time. He turned directly to Richards, his voice sharp and authoritative. "This is no longer in your hands," he stated. "Colonel Carter and the remains of Private First Class Reynolds will not be flying commercial. The Pentagon has arranged a private military flight. His transport is waiting." The terminal fell into stunned silence. Even Richards, who had been trying to salvage the airline's reputation, lost his composure for a brief moment. He blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Major Beckett, I can assure you that we were just about to—" Richards started, but Beckett cut him off with a single, piercing look. "You were just about to cover your tracks," Beckett stated matter-of-factly. The Marine veteran in the crowd let out a satisfied grunt. "Damn right," he muttered under his breath. Beckett then glanced at the counter staff who had gone completely silent. The same agent who had denied Carter's flight earlier looked as though she wanted to disappear into the floor. "We will be addressing this," Beckett continued, his tone unmistakably final. "Internally, legally, publicly." Richards swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. "Understood, sir," Richards said stiffly, the weight of Beckett's words settling on his shoulders like a storm cloud. Carter, still standing tall in his uniform, adjusted his hat and turned toward the Marine veteran. "Appreciate you, brother," he said. The Marine tipped his head in respect. "We look out for our own." With one final glance at the stunned crowd, Carter squared his shoulders and walked toward the exit. Not toward the gate, but toward something much bigger. The airline had lost control of the situation. But for Colonel Carter, the mission was finally back on course. As Colonel Carter walked away with dignity, the airline was left to deal with the fallout of its actions, and the consequences came swiftly and harshly. Within hours, major news outlets picked up the story, and headlines painted a damning picture of the company's mistreatment of a high-ranking military officer escorting a fallen soldier's remains. The public was outraged, and social media, already ablaze with viral posts, only intensified the backlash. By the next morning, the airline's stock price took a noticeable hit. Investors were alarmed as boycott calls began circulating on Twitter and Facebook under hashtags like "Let Him Fly" and "Respect Our Heroes." Thousands of customers cancelled their flights, vowing never to use the airline again. Veteran advocacy groups released public statements, demanding an official investigation into whether the airline had engaged in discriminatory or unethical practices. Some military families shared their own negative experiences with the airline, further damaging its credibility. The situation became so untenable that politicians, both local and national, began weighing in. Several lawmakers issued public condemnations, calling for an inquiry into the airline's policies regarding service members. The pressure mounted rapidly, and the airline's executives were left scrambling. In an attempt to contain the disaster, the airline's CEO made an emergency public statement. "This was a regrettable misunderstanding," he claimed, reading stiffly from a prepared statement. "We deeply respect our military service members, and we are conducting a full internal review to ensure such an incident never happens again." But the damage had already been done. The public wasn't buying it. The apology rang hollow, and people continued to flood the airline's social media pages with demands for real accountability. Meanwhile, inside the company, panic was spreading. Employees whispered about potential lawsuits, and mid-level managers began pointing fingers, blaming each other for the catastrophic PR disaster. The airline quietly suspended the employees involved, placing them on administrative leave, but it wasn't enough to stop the storm. Shortly after the viral uproar, a coalition of military and civil rights organizations filed a formal complaint against the airline, citing discrimination and failure to uphold service member protections. Legal experts speculated that a lawsuit was inevitable, and the airline braced itself for a costly legal battle. In response, other major airlines rushed to distance themselves from the controversy, some even offering special accommodations to military personnel in a thinly veiled effort to win public favor. The lesson was clear. This wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was a turning point. For Colonel Carter, the mission was completed. For the airline, the battle had just begun. The incident involving Colonel Carter's unjust denial of boarding was more than just a case of poor customer service or bureaucratic failure. It became a symbol of something much deeper. The viral outrage, the military intervention, and the airline's rapid downfall highlighted fundamental issues about respect, accountability, and the power of collective action. At its core, this event underscored a fundamental truth. Respect should not be conditional. Colonel Carter wasn't looking for special treatment. He was simply fulfilling his duty to a fallen soldier. Yet, without the public outcry, without the bystanders who refused to turn a blind eye, the injustice might have gone unchecked. This moment proved that when ordinary people speak up, when they refuse to stay silent, real change can and does happen. Social media played a crucial role in exposing the airline's wrongdoing. What might have been brushed under the rug in a less connected world became a nationwide scandal within hours. This showed that in today's society, people have power, and that power is amplified when they stand together. The viral posts weren't just about one soldier being denied his flight. They represented a collective demand for fairness and respect. The fact that the airline only acted when the backlash became overwhelming was a harsh reminder that corporations often prioritize damage control over doing the right thing. This raises an important question. How many injustices go unnoticed simply because no one is watching? The airline's backpedaling and eventual downfall sent a strong message to businesses, government agencies, and institutions. Mistreatment and discrimination will not go unchallenged. The swift intervention by military officials showed that when leaders step up, they can force institutions to take responsibility. Had the Pentagon not intervened, Had social media users not amplified the injustice, Colonel Carter might have simply been forced to walk away in silence. Instead, this incident forced a conversation about the treatment of military personnel, racial bias, and corporate ethics. The subsequent lawsuits and industry-wide reforms were proof that systemic failures can be confronted and changed, but only when people demand it. This story serves as a reminder to all of us. When you see injustice, speak up. The people in that airport had a choice: to ignore what was happening or to take a stand. Those who chose to act made all the difference. Respect should be the standard, not the exception. Colonel Carter's uniform, rank, or mission should never have been factors in determining whether he was treated fairly. Every person, regardless of background, deserves basic human dignity. Accountability matters. The airline didn't change course because of a moral awakening. It changed because people made it impossible to ignore the issue. That is how real change happens. In the end, the incident was about more than just a denied flight. It became a lesson in courage, solidarity, and the enduring fight for justice. Life often presents us with moments where we witness injustice, whether it's a small act of disrespect or a large-scale failure of a system. The story of Colonel Carter's wrongful treatment is a powerful reminder of what happens when people choose to stand up rather than stay silent. For many older adults, this lesson is particularly poignant. We have seen decades of change, fought through difficult times, and learned that real progress comes from persistence, courage, and unity. This story reaffirms key life lessons that apply to all generations, but resonate even more deeply for those who have spent a lifetime witnessing the ups and downs of society. 1. Silence enables injustice. Speaking up creates change. One of the most important lessons from this incident is that silence allows injustice to continue. If no one had spoken up at the airport, if bystanders had simply accepted the airline's excuse, Colonel Carter may have been forced to walk away without answers, without justice. But because people refused to stay silent, change happened. This is true in all aspects of life. When we see something wrong, we must find the courage to challenge it. Whether it's standing up for someone in need, defending our values, or speaking out against unfair treatment, our voice can be a powerful tool for change. 2. Respect should be a given, not a privilege. Another takeaway is that everyone deserves respect, not because of their status, profession, or background, but because they are human. Colonel Carter shouldn't have needed a viral video to be treated fairly. Unfortunately, we live in a world where respect is often given selectively, rather than universally. For those who have lived long enough to see the way society has evolved, this lesson is especially relevant. True dignity comes from treating others with fairness, regardless of who they are. If we expect respect, we must also be willing to give it, not based on conditions, but as a fundamental human right. 3. Collective action is stronger than individual effort. Finally, this story proves that change doesn't come from one person alone. It comes from collective action. The reason the airline was forced to reverse its decision was because people joined together. This is a lesson for life. When we face challenges, we don't have to fight them alone. Whether it's family, friends, or community, strength comes from unity. In the end, the story of Colonel Carter is not just about one man's struggle. It's about the timeless values of courage, respect, and solidarity. These lessons are ones that we can carry forward, teach younger generations, and continue to uphold in our daily lives.